Hello, my lovely friends. It's Emma here, from A Vintage Girl in a Modern World. And honestly, I still can't quite believe I'm finally making this video. You know, my grandma always used to tell me I was born in the wrong era. And I have to be honest, I think she may have been right. Because for as long as I can remember, I've been drawn to the past. Not because I wanted to live inside a history book, but because there's always been something about those old films, those old songs, and those beautiful black and white photographs that have always felt strangely familiar to me. It's always felt like home. And I thought for my very first video, I'd tell you a little bit about how it all began. Many of you who watch my other channel, Just a Girl Who Loves Elvis, will already know that my love of Elvis came from my granddad. He was a teddy boy in the 1950s and a huge Elvis fan. Some of my happiest childhood memories are of him singing Elvis songs or tucking me into bed at night. Looking back now, I don't think he realised he was giving me a gift that would stay with me for the rest of my life. Because all these years later, Elvis Presley is still a huge part of my life. And whenever I think about my granddad, I think about music, I think about laughter, I think about excitement. And honestly, I think that's where my journey began. But Elvis wasn't the only gift my family gave me. My love of vintage films came from my grandma and great-grandpa. And some of my happiest memories are sitting together watching old films and being completely fascinated by the stars, the stories, and the glamour of another time. It wasn't just the films that captured my imagination either. I completely fell in love with old television shows. I loved programmes like I Love Lucy, The Dick Van Dyke Show, Bewitched and Father Knows Best. There was something about those worlds that completely drew me in. The warmth, the humour, the friendships, the family life. They all felt comforting somehow. And before long, I found myself becoming fascinated by the stars who brought these stories to life. Women like Audrey Hepburn, Marilyn Monroe, Doris Day, Elizabeth Taylor, and of course Lucille Ball. There was something about their elegance, charm and presence that completely captivated me. Even today, I still find myself returning to those classic shows and films whenever I need a little comfort, or simply want to spend time in a world that feels familiar and welcoming. And the more old films I've watched, the more I fell in love with that world. The glamour, the elegance of stories, the feeling that life somehow moved at a gentler pace. And my great-grandpa gave me something else too. He also gave me my love of writing. My great-grandpa was a writer, and if I'm honest, I think I definitely inherited that love from him. In fact, I still use the very same typewriter he used throughout his writing career, and it remains one of my most treasured possessions. Alongside my mid-century writing desk is one of those pieces that make me feel connected not only to the past, but to him as well. And whenever I sit down to write, I often think about the stories he wrote, the letters he typed, and the life he lived. And somehow it makes me feel as though a little piece of him is still there beside me. He also gave me a love of afternoon tea, fine china, and all the little touches that made a home feel special. And my goodness, going round to his house for tea was always such a treat. There was a tea trolley, pretty teapots, beautiful china cups, all the little details that fascinated me as a child. And then there was my great-grandma. I can still picture her sitting elegantly in the corner looking though she stepped straight out of an old Hollywood film. The glamorous hair, the red lipstick, the pearls, the beautiful dresses. To me, she seemed impossibly elegant. Looking back now, I can see how much those afternoons shaped me. I wasn't just learning to appreciate old films or vintage treasures. I was learning to appreciate beauty, tradition, and the simple joy of taking time for the things you love. Even my family history seems to have little connections to the past. My other great-grandma lived for a time in a part of a beautiful old country house. She certainly wasn't wealthy and only rented part of it. But as a little girl, I thought it sounded like something from a storybook. And honestly, it felt like one too. I still remember sneaking into the old servants' quarters. The servant bells were all still there. Everything felt frozen in time. It all felt very upstairs, downstairs and Downton Abbey. And as a little girl, I absolutely loved it. Although, if I'm being honest, I was also quite convinced the place was haunted. I used to sleep in a very old bed that belonged to my great-great-grandma, and I never quite managed to convince myself there wasn't a ghost wandering around somewhere. Looking back now, I think my imagination was probably working overtime. The bed is actually still in the family today, which always makes me smile when I think about it. And perhaps that's one more reason I've always felt drawn to the past. Because for me, it was never just something I watched in old films. It was something I could reach out and touch. The older I've become, the more I've realised when I think about vintage life, I don't just think about an era. I think about the people who introduced me to it. I think about my granddad singing Elvis songs. I think about afternoons spent watching classic films. I think about tea trolleys, pretty china, and stories from the past. I think about family. And perhaps that's why this world has always felt so special to me. Because it isn't really about nostalgia. It's about connection. Connection to people. Connections to memories. Connection to the things that shaped us. And after thinking about it for a very long time, I finally decided to create a little corner of YouTube dedicated to all those things. On this channel, we'll be talking about classic films, old Hollywood, old movies, old TV shows, vintage books, timeless stars, afternoon tea, beautiful homes, fashion, music and history, and all the little things that make my vintage-loving hearts happy. I may even take you along on a few vintage adventures too. We already have a couple of exciting trips planned, and I'd love to share them with you. I might even show you some of my favourite vintage shops, introduce you to some of my favourite finds, and perhaps even give you a little glimpse into my own collection. I collect furniture from the 1950s and 60s, vintage treasures and vintage fashion. So there will be a little bit to real-life vintage living here too. Because for me, vintage isn't just something I watch on a screen or read about in a book. It's something I've always loved being surrounded by. It won't be a history lesson, and it certainly won't be about being an expert. It'll simply be one vintage-loving girl, sharing the things she loves, and inviting you along for the journey. So if that sounds like your kind of world, I'd absolutely love for you to come along for the journey. On Tuesday, we'll be stepping into the warm and wonderful world of Doris Day, as I talk about why she still feels like home to me. And on Thursday, we'll be spending some time with one of my all-time favourite television stars, as I share why I still love Lucy. So if you love old films, classic television, timeless stars, beautiful memories, and a little bit of old-fashioned magic, I think you're going to fit in right here. So thank you for joining me at the very beginning of this new adventure. And as always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and keep a little old-fashioned magic in your heart. I'll see you all on Tuesday.